Hi guys, welcome to the inaugural live session on the Eye on Econ. Before I introduce my reputed panelists today, I just want to break down the key motivations behind me starting up this channel and page. So as I was telling our panelists earlier, many Sri Lankans refer to Econ very loosely, connect with Econ very loosely and use the terms very loosely. For example, two main case studies talking about Sri Lanka's post-COVID-19 recovery. You hear these terms about stimulating growth. Everyone just says, oh, it's important that our country stimulates growth. But how do you stimulate growth? And then you refer to your A-level knowledge of econ where AD equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M, which I will break down for you on another day. And then you even look at things like the Express Pearl disaster and think about climate change for that matter. And I link it to my slide yesterday on the prisoner's dilemma associated with climate change and telling you why we as developing countries are a bit reluctant to go on the front foot and attack climate change at its core when you know that other developed countries may not cooperate. So you may end up losing out significantly in terms of payoffs, etc. So that was my main motivation here. So if you're an aspiring econ student, you can refer to my slides at any time during your course/degree. And if you have no interest in even taking up econ as a subject, and if it's over a dinner table conversation with your parents and family, you can think back to that Eye on Econ presentation on the migration crisis and then link any theories you want to from these slides. Having given you a bit of preamble on why I started this up, it's time I introduce my reputed panelists for our inaugural show. Firstly, we have with us Avinash De Silva, who completed his Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Melbourne. Avinash graduated in 2020 and read modules relating to micro and macroeconomics, and he's currently working in the auditing profession at Ernst Young, Sri Lanka. We have Naqiya Shiraz, who completed her Bachelor of Science Honours in Economics and Industrial Organisation from the University of Warwick. She graduated in 2020 as well and focused on modules relating to development and behavioral economics. She is working as a research analyst at Advocata Institute, Sri Lanka. Fellow Warwick graduate Nishakya Ranasinghe graduated with a BSc in Economics and Industrial Organisation. Her main areas of focus included industrial markets and development economics, and she's currently working as an investment research analyst at Acuity Knowledge Partners. And last but not least, we have Anouk Wimalaratna, who graduated with a BSc Honours in Economics from the LSE. And at present, Anouk is the managing director of a business consulting firm and also hosts multiple podcasts on the Anouk WW, which you should subscribe to. So over the course of this live show, please engage with us, drop your comments on the comments thread, and we'll take it up and we'll get our panelists to talk about it and address it live. So before we start off, let me just bring in Naqiya again. Before we start off, could each of you introduce yourselves in addition to the resume that I read out and tell us about what made you connect with Econ and what made you choose Econ at university. So we'll start off with Nishakya.
Yes, so thank you for that introduction, Viren. I chose economics. So that's a bit of a tough one because economics was, well, I always know that I wanted to pursue economics. It was mainly the fact that at A-level, clear path, I didn't have a clear idea what to take. So economics seemed to cover all the bases of me to keep my options open, figure out the areas that I'm really at the time, Econ just seemed I would obviously part because I studied Econ. I found it interesting. I like statistics on Econ.
Thanks, Nishakya. Thanks for that. And Naqiya, it's over to you on why you chose economics and what interested you about the subject.
Thanks, Viren. Thanks for having us on the show. Just before I start, can you hear me fine now?
Yes. Yeah, it's audible.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Naqiya. Same boat as Nishi. I did my economics and industrial organization degree at the University of Warwick. I chose economics because I generally liked it as a subject at school. Even though I'm sure we'll get into it in the podcast, it's slightly different when you go into university. But yeah, econ for me was very much the subject that I related most just because you saw it all around you. And I just needed to know more about it, I guess. So that's why I chose it.
Perfect. Thanks, Nakia. And Avinash, what made you choose economic modules in Melbourne, and what made you get interested in the subject as well?
I think for me, Viren, just like Nakia said, it's a very real world subject where you can practically apply all the concepts that you learn like in the real world. So it's much easier for me to study something like economics compared to something like finance, for example, because I feel like it's not limited to just one sector. You can study macroeconomics, you can study microeconomics, compared to finance, for example, where you study maybe just how individuals or organizations like use their monetary funds. So yeah, I think the real world application was really my liking.
Yeah, I feel like all three of you covered something very important. It's about how the subject of econ is very multifaceted and multidimensional, right? If you take law, engineering, medicine, for example, there is one recipe for success, right? You need to be very focusing on your theory to thrive in the subject. But when it comes to econ, there are various dimensions, be it political econ, developmental econ, or if you're into mathematics, more along the lines of econometrics. And this is what intrigues you with the subject, right? Because it's a very abstract concept. And I want to bring in Anouk here as well. Anouk, what is it about this abstract notion around economics that makes it interesting?
So that's okay. So that's a good question. See, I'll take it from a personal aspect. I can't really explain it in a general sense, but on a personal aspect, the abstract nature of the course, or at least of the subject, it resonated with me as a person because I am a person who's interested in everything and everything, in anything and everything, absolutely. Yeah. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing if you have the discipline to stick with the interest that you have, but it can be a curse because you can go all over the place and not really focus on anything at all. So economics as a subject is very broad, right? Like you can learn about politics and political economics, you can learn psychology, behavioral economics, you can learn finance and financial economics. There's many aspects and facets of economics that actually have linkages to different fields and disciplines. So for a person like me that has an interest in multiple disciplines, economics kind of is the subject that I resonated with because it blended with my own style of thinking. So that's the abstract nature that worked for me at least.
Brilliant. Well said there, Anouk. And guys, feel free to continue commenting. We appreciate your comments, etc. And we have Nishakya back with us. And this is where I bring Nishi into this again. Nishi, now that Anouk just spoke about the abstract nature of econ, right? Growing up in Sri Lanka, in a culture in which the concept of being a doctor, lawyer, or engineer looms large in terms of societal pressures on what you end up taking at undergrad, how blessed do you consider yourself for being able to pursue something that you wanted to do in terms of taking up econ at Warwick?
Okay. Yes, I definitely agree and with the culture. But in my case, I would have to say that I was lucky enough that my parents didn't exactly have that mentality. Oddly enough, they were quite discouraging of those fields. And this is pretty ironic because both of them are attorney at law. And so they were pretty supportive of my decision to pursue economics because I think they understood the value of it, but I realized that this is not the same mentality in Sri Lanka. I think a lot of people, when they hear that you're studying economics, they think you have to be an economist, maybe work in policy, become the governor of the central bank, but also there's just a lot more options. It's very versatile. They don't understand that economics just equips you with this analytical and problem solving tool that can be really applied in almost any industry. So yeah.
Very well said. Naqiya, would you like to add on to that?
I mean, I agree with everything Nishi said. Like, also, I'm very grateful that my parents were very supportive in letting me do econ and letting me do what I wanted. And like Nishi said, like it's I can't speak for every degree, but definitely econ, in my opinion, it's very much so. It gives you the skills that you'll need for any type of analytical workaround that you'd want to do in like stages of your life. And I feel like in retrospect, that's what I've been learning like after uni more than when I was in uni. So that's what I'd really tell everybody else who's thinking of doing econ. It definitely gives you like the foundation. So
very well said. And I think when you take the professions linked to econ, right? And I think the problem in Sri Lanka is that we're still a developing nation where we don't have broad scope in terms of career prospects for economists, etc. And I think that's where our parents' fear stems from. In saying that if you want to end up living in Sri Lanka, they'd expect you to get yourselves involved with a profession where your incomes are guaranteed, where there's job security. But in our field of economics, where it's so abstract, you have problems in terms of job security and in terms of knowing exactly what field of econ you want to do. Avinash, how did you feel growing up, coming from CIS during your A-levels? Were you supported by your parents in terms of wanting to do what you ended up doing in Melbourne, or was it something that you had to kind of rebel against a tad?
No, Viren. I think I, like everyone else, was very lucky that they were really supportive of whatever my decision was in terms of what I wanted to study. In my case, actually, my parents are both in the corporate sector, and they both started their careers out at Ernst Young, like I'm doing. But they were really supportive that I actually wanted to do something similar, but not while not being forced by them. I think mostly they advised me really well and they guided me well instead of like forcing me to do something specific. So I think I was lucky in that sense.
Yeah, and that was an immaculate answer there. And I think if you bring in Ditni's question here is on whether econ is maths heavy, it ties itself again to the abstract nature of econ, right? It depends on what field of econ you end up focusing on. If it's econometrics, yes, it's very maths heavy, entirely revolves around economics. But there are aspects like political econ or developmental econ, which is very theory focused and revolves itself around theory. So in that sense, I think, yes, a moderate understanding of mathematics is helpful across the board, but there are certain aspects of econ which really do not require prior knowledge in mathematics or regressions, etc. Anouk, I'm going to bring you in here on this, focusing again on this abstract nature of the subject. At the point at which you're a mid-20-year-old living in Sri Lanka or living in the subcontinent for that matter, how much do you think the subject of econ is evolving as a prominent career prospect for South Asians, or do you think we're still stagnating in terms of seeing it as a viable career path?
All right, so firstly, it depends on what aspect of, what subfield of economics you want to drop yourself into. So, for example, with an econ degree, you can get into investment banking, private equity, venture capital, all that stuff, right? All the cool stuff. And you can do that relatively early in your, I don't know, right after uni, you could get a management consulting role, you could get an investment banking role, and those opportunities are opening up in South Asia, definitely in Sri Lanka. So with an econ degree actually prepares you very well for one, provided you do finance models, right? So that's something I always recommend anyone. We'll get to this later, actually. It's a common question. But basically, as long as you have a very diverse range of subjects, of modules within your econ course, you can actually have your hand in many pots. So for example, like these three guys here, you could be a policy analyst really easily with an econ degree. And it matters because at the end of the day, who runs policy in a country? It's the people with some sort of economics or political science training in general, not always the case, right? But in general. So I think that as more people become aware of how important it is for a country to be governed more people will be taking an interest in economics. Also, if you want to make a lot of money, definitely you need to learn finance, and of course, finance is a subset of economics. So, in general, having a finance background always matters, not just in terms of a profession, but also in terms of you being able to run your own business. Because everyone's well versed in marketing, everyone's well versed in management, in operational, general administration, operational management, all of that. But finance is the one that everyone's a bit afraid of. The thing is, it's not difficult. It just requires a lot of practice. And once the practice is down, it's super easy. And then it helps you make more informed decisions. So I would say that the importance of econ is absolutely rising. And before we move on to the next question, Viren, 2 shout outs. Number 1 to Nithya Fernando, who's watching this. Awesome to see you again, Nithya. Number 2 is to Quack, the guy called Quack, who said that his family is forcing him to be a doctor. Quack, my advice to you, buddy, is if your family is forcing you to be a doctor and you don't want to do it, you should think very hard about how you want to do it. But if they're funding you and all that stuff and you have to be a doctor, then go for it. But also practice your desires on the side. Meaning, do your work, do your 8 hours training in medicine and stuff, and then in the next 3 hours, study economics, study political science, study management, study whatever you can, and keep an interest in that, right? So that in any case, in the future, if you want to change or make a shift, you can. You're knowledgeable enough to get through an interview and do it. Yeah, that's my advice.
Brilliant, Anouk. We heard it from the Don himself, Anouk, right there, on advising you to keep your options open, is what Anouk basically just said. I want to bring Avinash back into this. And Avinash, what do you think, in addition to the factors we spoke of, what do you think are the other deterrents to taking up a subject like economics at the undergrad level? Is it the Is it only the uncertainties around the professions that we spoke of, or does it also have to do with the notion that you can get lost in economics, if that makes sense, in not knowing what field you really want to specialize in?
Yeah, Viren, I agree with that. I think personally for me, what really was my biggest deterrent was I'm not really the best at math. And I found that I had to do subjects like econometrics at uni. And I found that really difficult because my math wasn't up to standard. So that's why I found it difficult. So I feel like a lot of people do go into an econ course with the notion that, there's going to be a lot of math. But like you said, Viren, it all depends on what kind of econ you're going to specialize in. So if you're going to specialize in developmental or political economics, you probably won't see that much math in it.
Yeah, brilliant. And Anouk and Avinash, Quack appreciates your sentiments and in encouraging him to do to pursue his passions. I'm going to, before I entertain this question from Ditni, I have something I'd like to say that is tied in with what Anouk and Avinash just spoke of, and that is the link between how economics is taught in school and how it is taught in university. And I think that the bridge between those two also form a deterrent, in my opinion, on taking up econ. Because, and this is where I blame the London system we grew up in terms of teaching us econ, because it was very theory focused. And here's a shout out to Mr. Asita Ranasinghe, who Anouk, Avinash and I are close to. And when we focused in on the theory review for A-levels, right, all we had to do was regurgitate his notes. And this is, I've always said this to Mr. Asita, I could hear him at the back of my head every time I sat an econ paper.
For sure.
Definitely, Viren.
And now when you take it to uni, right, and this is where Avinash and Anouk's opinions on maths come in, it's more practical based. Like, there's no theory behind it. For example, I had a 20-mark question in my second year economics exam. I think it was macroecon in my second year. And I only had 10 minutes to complete this question. And all I did was draw an ADAS diagram and kind of give them some annotations around it. And I ended up getting a first on that. If I did that for my London A-level exam, it would have been, the mark scheme would have said, diagram 2 marks, and would have just allocated 2 marks for me because they didn't have the written explanations that were required. And I think before I get into Ditni's question, I just want to bring that up in terms of how there's a severe deterrence to taking up econ in uni, because it's very different to the economics we've been brought up in school. And I feel like that's where the London Edexcel system or the IB system in Sri Lanka and in South Asia has to evolve to allow students to know exactly what it is like for them taking up these subjects in university. I'm going to bring in Whitney's question here. Whether the econ degree has a good or safe job industry. And I think we've spoken about this earlier in terms of how there are insecurities, job insecurities tied to the econ industry in Sri Lanka. But I feel like over time, as econ becomes a more prominent occupation or path, and as parents and older generations start acknowledging that it is an important part for their kids, I hope Sri Lanka and the rest of South Asia, for that matter, promotes growth in this sector. And I also want to get Naqiya's and Nishakya's input on this, right? On Hamza's question, on how will economics help in business? You are both involved in think tanks, in research institutes. If you had to advise an upcoming business, how much will your econ knowledge help on that front? I'll go to Nishakya first.
Sure, of course, Viren. Yes, so on how it will help a business. So would that be a business you're running? I guess either way, it does give you a sense of awareness, because because this is not a narrow subject, right? You have a broad understanding of the macroeconomy as well. So you know various driving forces of markets, even when it comes to the corporate industry. So for instance, I studied industrial economics, and that focused a lot on analyzing competition and regulation policies in different market structures. So it gives you whatever space you're getting into, it gives you a sense of how to analyze the market, the competition, what would be a good entry strategy. So there are various aspects like that. And just coming back to why we studied econ, like the whole analytical, logical mindset that they give you. And also a lot of people actually fail to realize that econ is quite people-centric. You're also basically studying the way people behave and how they make decisions. So when it definitely helps a business in that sense, like when you need to know your market. So econ teaches you that. Yeah.
Perfect. Very well said. And before I bring Naqiya in, I also wanted to highlight what Nishakya said in saying that if you have knowledge on microeconomics, you can help advise businesses on growth, on organic growth for that matter, and inorganic growth of those businesses. Naqiya, are you here with us?
I'm here, Viren. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you are audible, although your video is like, do you mind if I pose the next question to you, or do you want some time to get it sorted?
Oh, that's fine, Viren. You can ask. Go ahead.
All right. So in addition to what Nishakya just said, and we spoke about how abstract economics is, so I want to get to the next round of questions in asking you what particular branch or field of economics interested you most, and what particular field did you delve into at university?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in uni, the one that really resonated with me for some reason was behavioral economics, because I like the whole I think Anouk mentioned it in the beginning as well. Econ is so broad, and psychology was something that I was very interested in, and I think behavioral was kind of the closest to kind of merge those two together, right? And part of my dissertation was also to do with happiness and how that relates to institutions in a way. And so yeah, definitely behavioral economics is one big part of what I was interested in. But more recently, I've found myself being more interested into macroeconomics in general, just because it encompasses pretty much everything that happens to us today, right? Like supply and demand, you see it everywhere. And that being said, it's also very much interconnected, couple that with technology that you have every day, and it's impossible to have just one reason why something happens. So I think macro that kind of just encompasses everything perfectly. But that being said, again, it can get complicated. But yeah.
Perfect. Nishakya, would you like to add on to that in terms of how your experience may have been a tad different at Warwick?
Sure, of course. I think I went into university thinking I would be interested in finance and that sort of area of economics, but I was actually really pleasantly surprised to find that I really enjoyed the development economics modules, I guess similar to Naqiya's interests in a way. So I took up many of those modules, realized that I was interested mainly in education economics, which is what I based my thesis on. So aside from that, it's very hard to pick one area because I tried so many optional modules because I just picked whatever was interesting to me. And but if I were to pin down an area, it would be developmental economics.
Perfect. And I'm bringing in Ditni's question here because it's at time, because I want to bring in Avinash, who did a Bachelor of Commerce at Melbourne. So it was the other way around, where he focused on commerce. Avinash, would you say that your Bachelor of Commerce complemented you taking up a couple of econ modules along the way? Was that a good combination for you in uni?
Yeah, Viren, I think what I liked most about the course was it was flexible in what we could study. So like Anouk said earlier, studying something like finance along with econ is a good combination. So this course allowed me to do that and to pick subjects that I liked, had a genuine interest in, plus that were useful for me.
Yeah.
So Naqiya said, I liked macroeconomics as well the most, mainly because of that real world aspect that teaches you and like understanding the rationale behind government policies and how countries interact with each other.
Yeah.
I think that was the most interesting part.
Brilliant. And Anouk, what particular branch of economics interested you most?
Okay, so here we go. Firstly, I want to address a few things. So, if any of you guys actually thinking about what minors to take while you're studying economics, you need to do two things, guys. In my opinion, number one is think very carefully about what interests you, because that's what you're going to sit there and study because you're passionate about it. Number two is think to yourself what you're going to do with your life post uni. Right? Like what do you think will be interesting for you in terms of your skill set and what will be congruent with your skill set? For example, I would always recommend a psychology module because understanding psychology is absolutely important in getting ahead in life, right? So definitely study psychology, the theory behind it. I would say study coding, so computer science modules would be interesting because the way technology is moving ahead, you need some sort of skill when it comes to coding. I would also say learn management theory, because you're going to need to know how to manage people, especially if you want to take leadership positions in any future job that you want to do. Learn finance, because that is absolutely important in running a business or just in general in life, right? If you're making money, but money is involved, obviously, right? And you need to have a very good grasp of how to deal with it. Finance teaches you that. So think very carefully about what exactly you want to be doing with your life, and think, like, if you're 20 or 21, 22, whatever it is, think about 30-year-old you, think about 40-year-old you, and predict what will be most important for you at that time, when you're 20 years old, and then make that decision at that moment. Now, for me, what I chose was behavioral economics, because again, I'm interested in psychology, and that's the best marriage of psychology and economics. Finance for obvious reasons, because that's what I do, and development economics and policymaking, because in case my 20-year-old me's, 22-year-old me's mindset was, in case I want to get into policymaking, in case I want to be an economist, which at the time I realized I didn't want to, but just to keep the door open, I studied econometrics and policymaking and public economics, development economics, just to make sure I had that door open. So again, I'm 30 now, so it's like 8 years past, but I haven't gone down that route, but I know that I have the knowledge to be competent in that field if I choose to go down that field, maybe when I'm 40. So I haven't gotten to use it yet, but in case I have to, I'm prepared for it. So think ahead, guys. That's my advice.
Very detailed, Anouk, and some great advice for all you guys. So owning in on what I did under my BSc honors in economics at St. Andrews, it had a lot of econometrics, it had a lot of political econ, developmental econ, and I was left with very in-depth knowledge across the board, right? And when I was applying for my master's, which I'll be starting off in September, I wanted to focus in on political econ, whilst linking econometrics and things like causality and multiple linear regressions into play as well. But under political econ, and this is going to be my dissertation topic for my master's next year, is focusing on Sri Lanka and the civil war that ensued in Sri Lanka. I want to focus on what is called the Downsian model of political competition, which refers to how politicians cater to the median voter of a country to gain votes, right? So at the point at which they cater to the median voter, they feel like they have ample number of votes to win a seat or to win the election. And why is that bad for Sri Lanka or countries like Sri Lanka, where there's a lot of where we have a lot of ethnic diversity and religious diversity? At that point, you start disenfranchising those on both sides of the spectrum because you're focusing in on this median voter alone. And at that point, right, policies like the Sinhala Only Act, for example, that was promoted at the time, that triggered an outcry amongst various ethnicities in Sri Lanka. I want to see the role that had to do with causing and prolonging the civil war in Sri Lanka, and how the Downsian model of political competition was a factor at play. And in addition to that, I've also been very interested in game theory. For football fans and cricket fans around, game theory is something you can all relate to, be it the scenario of taking a penalty kick. For that matter, you have multiple payoff matrices for the goalkeeper and the penalty taker. So, and I think that's a perfect example to tell you how diverse econ is, right? It need not be anything organic. It can be something like your interest in sports, and you can tie econ into it in any way, shape, or form. And I also want to quickly, because I don't want us to repeat what we said earlier, I want to bring in something that Pratt has asked us on what are common starting jobs. So in Sri Lanka, as Nishakya, Naqiya, and Avinash are doing right now, there are various consulting firms, there are various think tanks you can join in Sri Lanka. Shout out to Gehan and Shamara at Verite, for example, and Kitmina at IPS for that matter. And you can join these think tanks as an analyst or as an intern and gain some exposure into how the political sphere and economic sphere operates in Sri Lanka. Everyone kind of holds politics and econ independently, and I think that's the biggest problem. Economics is related to various fields, right? Econ is a part of our day-to-day lives, right? Be it you going shopping and budgeting your grocery expenditure, that has to do with economics. Or certain government policies are all linked to economics. So that shows you the diverse range that economics covers. And I don't want this to go on for too long, so I want to move on to my next round of questions on and we'll start off with Naqiya. Naqiya, what would be your advice for any potential undergrads trying to take up econ? And let's assume they're doing so without school knowledge of economics.
I mean, that's a great question. And I think putting myself in that position, I think if you're starting off with econ, definitely know that it is going to be, I know you depend, like in my experience, it was definitely very maths heavy. And I think if you're looking to do econ, kind of, obviously it'll depend on like degree to degree from university to countries, but look at modules that you're going to be taking. If you're not very comfortable with math, it's not going to be, it'll be a little bit harder, not that it's going to be a kind of block for you, but definitely math. I know even when I was applying, a lot of people had told me that it's going to be very stats heavy, a lot of algebra, but I didn't expect the level of like stats it'll go to, and especially like econometrics in our second year, like probably the hardest module I've done, just because I don't like statistics in general. So definitely that was a challenge. So keep in mind that it can get math heavy, but don't let that like interfere. Secondly, again, I think it's a lot to do with kind of, I think economics is a great foundation if you want to do something, because you genuinely can get into any field that you want. Like just looking at the panel today, like all of us are doing really different things. And I think with econ gives you that kind of foundation for you to be able to figure it out. And I think I chose econ personally because I liked it, but I also wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Like I was kind of in between engineering and econ, just because I think I like that kind of analytical mindset. And I chose Econ because it was something that gave me what I felt it would give me more options, because I mean, that was just my personal opinion. So definitely look into your like specific modules and the specific like unis and like things, and talk to people. I think that's probably the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, very insightful advice there, Naku. Avinash, what would you tell your younger self about taking up something like Econ at uni?
I think the main thing is, like, I can speak in terms of Australia. Like, for example, we graduate from school in about July 20, around July, and for people going to Australian universities, we usually go in February. So there's about a 6-month gap, I think. So I think the best thing that someone could do is brush up on the skills that you don't feel you're that comfortable in, because you tend to forget things. By the time you go to university, you've forgotten half of what you did for stats or half of what you've done for anything, really.
Yes.
So I think that's some good general advice that that people should take up in case they are going to some place like Australia. Also, like Anouk said earlier, even though someone may not be doing an economics course, a university like Uni Melbourne offers something called breadth subjects. So say you're doing a degree in biochemistry or something. So Uni Melbourne will offer you like subjects that you can do outside your course within your degree. So I think that's a good way to like develop your skills outside of your course if you were looking for that kind of option.
Yeah. Great advice then. I think that's important because Avinash just gave you advice and that was not dependent on you taking up economics at university. I think it's relevant in all spheres and in all subjects that you do end up taking up. Anouk, what would you tell your younger self 10 years ago as you look to start off at LSE?
I tell myself, study maths, fool. That's the first thing I'd say. So LSE Econ, guys, if it's extremely math heavy, extremely stats heavy. You name it, right? Any course, right? Political economics, development economics, labor economics, name any kind of economics, and it's full maths based, right? So if your foundational maths is weak or mid-tier, you're in big trouble. Not just in first year, but in all 3 years. Right? Now, the beauty of LSE Econ is in your first year, you do Econ in general, then you do maths, then you do stats, then there are 3 modules. And the 4th module, you get to pick whatever you want. I picked, if I'm not mistaken, economic history because I'm a history buff. And having knowledge of classics and history is very important in life, because you learn from the mistakes of others, and then as long as you learn it, and then you internalize the facts that you learn, and then you try to learn the lessons of the people that made the mistakes, and then you try to avoid it, you actually can get ahead much quicker in life. Especially in your 20s, you can have an accelerated path. So understanding history and classics is extremely important in life, guys. So that's why I chose economic history in my first year. In your second year, you must do micro, you must do macro, you must do metrics. And the 4th choice is open. So I did finance because I know that's extremely important for what I have to do. And in your 3rd year, you get to do whatever you want. Any four modules you pick, right? So I chose the ones that interest me: behavioral, public policy, finance again, and something else I can't remember now. But the point is that, again, it goes back to know your maths, know your stats, because if you don't know those 2, you're in deep trouble in uni, right? And also know what you want to do with your life and know what interests you, so that you can sit there and study for 10 hours or 12 hours or whatever it is and keep going and not give up, because that's absolutely important. And when you're in uni, guys, remember, do past papers. Drill past papers, because that's what matters.
Stellar advice from Anouk. And before I go to Nishakya, I want to time something that Anouk said. So I took up advanced econometrics in my 3rd year in uni. And the Scottish higher levels, or the Scottish equivalent of A levels, is very math heavy. So I had a room full of students, a room full of Scotsmen and women who had maths for them was a piece of cake, right? And as much as I did further maths for my A levels, there was a big jump in terms of quality of or the intense amount of mathematics involved in these 2 spheres, right? And another piece of general feedback I have for you all is, so whilst I was in my tutorials with these other maths wizards, right, it's very easy for you to tell yourself, look, I'm not good enough to be here. All my 5 panelists today may tell you that there was one moment during their undergrad or postgrad where they were stuck in a room and telling themselves, heck, I don't deserve to be here. Do not tell yourself that, because two pieces of advice on that front. One, you deserve your place amongst the best around you, and you may have a very different way of studying. For those of you who know me, and all 4 of these individuals on this program know me very well, and my love for sports very well. On the eve of my economics A-levels paper, and Mr. Asita, forgive me for saying this, but I was watching Sri Lanka versus Pakistan in the Champions Trophy when Visera Pereira dropped that blunder and we were knocked out of the Champions Trophy, right? Why is this example relevant? I am someone who crams well under pressure, so once we lost that game, I pulled off an all-nighter and kind of did very well at my exam. You have others who may be very methodical, who do their daily work, etc. Do not set your study goals or targets based off your friends or what they do. Over the course of my 4 years at St. Andrews, I only cited the library once, and that was to campaign for myself in a debating election. Whereas my flatmate was in the library from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. It would have been very easy for me to tell myself, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? But no, I recognize the fact that we all have our different ways of studying, and we all have our different recipes for success, and you need to acknowledge that. So never put in self-doubt at the point of you starting to compare yourselves with others. And that is something very toxic about Sri Lanka in terms of comparing your grades with everyone else. Guys, at university, no one else really cares about how you did. No one really cares about where they stand in class. As long as you end up doing relatively well for yourselves, that's all that matters. Nishakya, would you agree with that? And would you have other insights?
Definitely. My advice was going to be based over years, actually, because I think even I struggled initially in my first year, because you see this trend when you start economics, like everyone seems to be, at least in my perspective, everyone seemed to be very internship driven. Like as they went to university, they were looking at spring internships, and then they would just already gotten the ball rolling when I hadn't started any of that. So it's easy to just compare yourself and just not feel great. So like Viren said, it's good to always take things at your own pace, because while obviously career prospects are important, it's also good to use your first year at undergrad to just try everything and explore different modules. So my advice would be to definitely just go ahead, try a module and pick the modules you enjoy and pick the modules you like, whatever appeals to you, because you might then realize that you're completely interested in another field. But yeah, I think it's for anyone going into uni, it's very important to remember to take things at your own pace. That's the one takeaway.
Great insights there, Nishi. And I want to bring in Ditni's question here. And guys, all of us are a bit overwhelmed by the amount of viewers we have. I was not expecting this for my first show, but we've had a constant stream of between 10 to 20 subscribers joining us throughout the 40 minutes we've been on thus far. Ditni's question is, while we learn econ, we learn about so many economists. Who is your favorite famous economist? This question has to be answered by one individual on this panel, and that is Anouk Wimalaratna. For me, Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations is a must-read for all students trying to take up econ. I think that's the Bible of economics. And everything that we've discussed on this program thus far is linked to certain chapters from the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. Anouk, to the Adam Smith of our podcast so far, and to the wisest amongst the youngsters here on this channel, do give us your take on certain famous economists that you've referred to.
So Smith would obviously be number one, but again, his work is pretty heavy. So take your time and read what he has to say. And again, it depends on what field that you like to follow. So for example, if it's micro or macro, Robert Solow is always the don. If you want to talk about finance, Merton Miller, Black-Scholes, the famous model, of course. Spencer Black, quite a few big names in finance. If you want to learn political economics, Kenneth Arrow, Darren Acemoglu, amazing people to check out. Why Nations Fail by Darren Acemoglu is a book that I would absolutely recommend to anyone if you're doing political economics, or in general if you want to know about economics and the marriage between politics and economics, democracies, dictatorships, whatever it is. Acemoglu is a really good bet. He's incredible. Not just because he's an LSE grad as well, but because it's absolutely amazing, his work. I love Solo. I'm a big fan of Solo's work. Bob Solo. Lawrence Summers has some good stuff. He's an incredible economist, a former emeritus of Harvard. And basically the Chicago School of Economics guys of the 80s and the current MIT crop, they're the guys who are absolutely, they're the leading thinkers and they're the leading innovators. So definitely go and read their work, but again, understand that their work is very heavy. Yeah. So except for probably Acemoglu, who makes it a bit more digestible, but the others are very econ heavy. So you need to have a good understanding of math and you need to take your time. And what I would recommend is to watch a few videos of people who actually break down the papers into the key points and try to get an understanding from that. Don't worry too much about the math if you're not an economist. If you're someone that's an enthusiast, or if you're someone that just wants the knowledge to help in the critical thinking process, just look at the main points and try to understand how they link up to real life.
Yeah, I completely agree. Do any of my panelists have anything they'd like to add, or did Anouk cover that sufficiently?
One thing I'd like to add, Viren, I think while I was in school, I think it was during my O-levels, I really enjoyed the book Free Economics because
yes, of course. How could I forget? yes.
It gave me like a great basic understanding of econ, and it like really helped me to just understand the subject matter and stuff in like a more informal, casual way.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think another one I'd add on to that is The Undercover Economist. I think Anouk is looking for a book that he wants you to read. I'll leave it to you for a couple of minutes. And before we start wrapping up, I just want to...
That's the book.
Yeah.
That's the one. That's the one that Avinash and Anouk were referring to. So do feel free to get in touch with us if you want to know about the availability of these books, etc. But one thing I'd also like to say is, in university, you may think that you have to do a lot of pre-required readings, but my advice to you is don't be overwhelmed by the amount of readings you're asked to do before you get yourself into university. Focus on the readings that you're given. And yes, whilst it's good to read around the subject, focus on those core readings, because at the end of the day, that's what you're going to be examined on. It's a bit of a trade-off really on that front in terms of how you devote your time towards reading around the subject whilst also handling your subject matter. And that is where I want to bring in Nishi and Naqiya now. We're both at Warwick, and you're both studied very similar subjects at Warwick. What were the similarities and differences you all had individually in terms of how you all dealt with studying for exams or studying or engaging with your content matter? Naqiya, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
We briefly lost Naqiya. Sorry, Naqiya, we briefly lost you. Are you here with us?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're clear now.
Yeah. So in terms of, I think we did practically the same degree. So a lot of the modules were very similar. In terms of studying, also like you mentioned, a lot of reading. And personally, I couldn't get through a lot of it. And I think the best thing I think I can tell people and is just like to speak to your like lecturers and like your seminar tutors or whatever, depending on how the system is, and kind of get an understanding of what they think is important, because they'll give you everything that they think is interesting, everything that they would want you to learn. But at the end of the day, it's not possible because you have so many other modules, not just the ones that they kind of are teaching. So what I did was kind of speak to anybody like older than me, see what they thought was the most important, kind of narrow it down that way. And yeah, just practice, I think.
Perfect. Nishi?
Yes, definitely. I think one of the main takeaways from what Naqiya said was it's so important to make friends that are in maybe second or third year when you're in your first year, because you'll be asking them a lot of questions and you can always approach them in an informal way about which modules you want to take. So that really helped me. And for sure, I think a lot of people, this is something a lot of people don't utilize. It's actually the support that uni offers. So they have got office hours, they've got sort of maths workshops, and I think that's so important because you need all you can get at this point. So that would be a pro tip as well. And I've never been really the last minute studier, if that's a word. So it definitely at uni it's very hard to study anything last minute. So I would also say it to be methodical and do your daily work or take it progressively, because you can't cram. Like if the quantum is just so much. But that was my experience.
Very well said. And now we're at the stroke of the 50th minute. We've got immense engagement with us over the course of this first episode, but I think it's time to start wrapping things up. So to my four panelists, if there's one thing each of our viewers can take away with them from this episode, what would it be? I'll start off with Avinash. What would you like our viewers to take away from this? What would be your final piece of advice for today?
I think Nishakya just summed it up really well. I think you shouldn't wait to cram all your content at uni right at the end. I think it's really important to do your daily revision, at least weekly revision, to keep up to date with everything that you're doing. Because usually you'd have like assignments or mid-semester tests or something that you need that forces you to like keep up with your content. I think that's the main thing, keeping on top of your work.
Perfect. Very well summarized there. Nishakya?
Yes, I would take this opportunity to, I guess, advocate Econ, because it's, if you don't know what you want to do, it's the best subject because it's so interdisciplinary. You interact with other subjects, and you're bound to find something that you're interested in. And just at the end of the day, you really need to enjoy what you're liking. So Econ's really great that way.
Perfect. And Naqiya?
I think I'm just going to jump in on one of the things that Avinash said. And I think for me, like Viren, like I'm a crammer when it comes to studying, and you just can't do that in uni. There's just too much. So one of the things that I think would help, or help me at least, is just like finding groups or study groups where you can just study with your friends constantly throughout the year. That way it's not like, it's fun at the same time while you're constantly revising, because that's very important. So definitely, again, like try and figure out what works for you individually, because it's very different to what you are used to in school, because in school you always have someone to like tell you what to do, kind of make sure you're doing the work that you need to do, but that's not like that.
Summed up succinctly, Naqiya. Thanks. And Anouk?
All right, guys. So here's my biggest piece of advice. Use the time in uni to really understand yourself, right? Beyond just the scope of the work that you do, try to understand yourself as a person. Right? This is extremely important, guys. Understand yourself as a person, experiment with who you are as a person, and be okay with what happens. Right? The world does not end with your degree. If you don't get your first class, if you fail a year, if things are looking bad, don't worry, guys. The world moves on, and so will you. Do not worry. Right? Just keep on fighting to the next day. Right? Because trust me, when you look back at life, like I'm talking like I'm some old man now, right? But I'm only 30, right? But what I'm saying is, right, when I was going through my uni life and when I wasn't doing as well as I thought I could have done, I felt really bad with myself. I felt like a failure. I felt like a loser, right? And at the time when you're going through those motions, it feels like the world is on your shoulders. But 8 years later, 7 years later, 8 years later, whatever it is, I have great memories about uni, but I can't ever think or imagine that I had that kind of weight on my shoulders back in the day, because it just seems so far away now. It just seems so far away. Life goes on. People don't care. As long as you show yourself to be an absolute champion in what you do. And how you do that is whenever you get knocked down, pick yourself back up, tell yourself you're going to make it to tomorrow, you're going to make it to next week, you're going to make it to next month, next year, right? And you're going to figure it out. Keep pushing yourself. Study multiple disciplines, study your main discipline, keep going and never give up. I'm telling you guys, 8 years later, right? like all the pressures that I have, I laugh thinking about it now. And I didn't do as well as I could have when I was in uni. But I laugh now because it really doesn't matter. It really does not matter, guys, how well or how badly how well you do. All that matters is how you conduct yourself and carry your life. This is the truth, guys. Take it from me.
Well said, Don. And I'm left speechless by these four because I don't know what to add. But I just want to say, guys, keep an eye on Econ, right? That's the perfect way I could sum all this up. This was a bit of a trial run for me as well. I wanted to see what the engagement was like, and this was off the roofs, right? This is beyond what I expected. So thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you know when we're live next. I'll be doing this very often now because I've seen that it's been a success at the onset. Also follow us on Instagram. It's @Econ, and I'll be posting slides, presentation slides for you all, and we'll also be explaining various concepts. My piece of advice would be to maybe subscribe to The Economist. It's a nice way of engaging with the subject, and it also breaks things down, breaks real-world examples down for you succinctly. So I want to thank all my four panelists. You'll see them very often on the show if they would allow me to have them back on a few more shows. It was a great first episode. Thank you for all the comments. I think all five of us would agree in saying we were overwhelmed by the number of comments on our first episode. So subscribe to this channel, like our Instagram page. And I'm also going to take a leaf out of my cricket analyst co-host book in saying we're in the midst of a pandemic. So do heed by the rules and regulations set forth in your respective countries. Thanks, guys. Good night.